Testing.
And then Thursday, you like to do linguistics and Friday, I like to watch the campus and we have it's very simple. And it is a competition. Yeah, I do.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. What time does this lecture start? 7:45. Okay. So the next one is 9:40. Sorry, 8:40, and then it's 9:35, 10:30. Okay. It's one thing. I mean, I studied here. It was exactly the same back then, but I completely have forgotten how it works. While we're waiting, for those of you who are in the room, how many of you are doing a B.Ed? Who's here? B.Ed. 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 Okay, so a number of B.Ed students, and you all foundation phase, right? Okay. Is there anyone who's not foundation phase who's taking Ling by choice? Okay, cool. And then, so if you're not doing a B.Ed, who's doing a B.A.? Okay. Is there anyone who's doing like a B.Soc Sci or other degrees as well? Anyone doing what are you doing? Say again? BSS, okay. Is anyone doing a BSc and taking Ling? I'm particularly wondering if anyone is doing computer science as well as linguistics. Have you met anyone in the Ling class who's also taking comp sci? Okay. Another question, who's planning to take Ling 3? I know it's early in the year, but okay, one person, 2, 3, 4, okay. So a number of you. So back to our motivation lecture, for those of you who are planning to take it, can you imagine yourselves as linguists in the future in a very vivid way? Just doing linguistic things, taking chunks of language, figuring out the phonology, or whatever part of Ling you like. How many of you can imagine yourselves in the future as being linguists? You can? Okay. Can you see yourselves giving lectures or tutoring Ling? Can you see yourselves advising governments on linguistic policy? No, you've got to be specific, because if you can't imagine those examples, then I'm not sure how vivid it is in your imagination. Okay. Anyway, no, it's always interesting just to try that ideal second language self out, not necessarily just for language, but people have an ideal self for all sorts of things. That theory can be applied in different ways. Yeah.
Speech therapy, is that do you only need linguistics?
For speech therapy. I actually don't know. I mean, I know Rhodes doesn't have speech therapy, but you can probably get credits for it. If you take Ling, you can probably get credits. Okay, I'm going to make a start. We're a few minutes late. So today is kind of, it's just a bit more fun, and I'm not presenting this as being highly academic. It's a lot to do with my own intuitions about the future of language learning in the world that we live in. I mean, it's been interesting to see as all of you come in over the various weeks. Most of you will be looking at your phones. I mean, everyone kind of does that nowadays. And all those phones have so many apps installed and things that you can do with them. So I've got a thesis that because of that, as well as kind of this AI revolution that really became clear and obvious that it had arrived in 2023, those two things together, along with kind of increasing access and so-called democratization of access to technology and the internet, that's just going to change everything about language, the way that people interact with devices, the way they interact with themselves. So much will be mediated through, I mean, it already is. Social media, for instance, is just, you could apply sociocultural theory to the way we interact in social media. Mediates our identities a lot of the time, particularly some of the more visual social media, very much how we think about ourselves, but then also how we think about how other people think about us is all mediated through the internet. And now increasingly, in a very personalized way, the advent of something like ChatGPT, obviously there'd already been AI coming up to that point in all sorts of different forms, but that was like the moment that things crystallized. Oh, this thing is hectic. This is going to change the world. And I mean, one of my contentions is that we had like the printing press, which obviously enabled lots of things, mass education. You didn't have to painstakingly write out manuscripts. And so that was like a massive innovation that changed the course of history. And in the same way, I think this is an equivalent like revolution. Just thinking forward 50 years, 100 years in the future, it's pretty scary. There's a lot of upside, but there's a heck of a lot of downside as well to that. Anyway, that's kind of just me opening. So I'm applying now those kind of thoughts. It's an attempt at futurism with regard to what we've been studying over this term. Second language acquisition as a discipline where people research the thing, but also as a thing, as a phenomenon that people actually study and learn languages. So we're probably going to finish early today as well. This is not very long. And then we'll go to just a bit of a briefing about the exam. I've kind of outlined the more specific things that you should look at as you study for the exam. Okay, so just introducing introducing what I'm going to be talking about. So access to smartphone technology, onset of ChatGPT in November 23. I remember it vividly because I was about to submit my PhD. And obviously I've gone through the whole process of, for years, crafting this long document. And I was so frustrated that I didn't have something like that that I could help, for instance, and I'm sure all of you have experimented with it. I mean, it's utterly transforming higher education as well as, probably not primary school as much, but definitely secondary or high school. Just helping, like when you have some thoughts in point form and you just need to write them out in a way that you can read through them and see if they make sense, right? And sometimes the AI chatbots will hallucinate and make rubbish up, but sometimes it'll get it so right. So yeah, I think it's like that was really just the arrival of the AI age was that, particularly in the realm of language. We're still seeing innovations in terms of like the physical world. So things like machine learning with like robots and physical artificial intelligence, that still probably hasn't reached the point where the manipulation of language has reached. But it's getting there, and particularly when that's combined with the manipulation of language, it can do a lot of things within the social sphere, as opposed to, say, manufacturing and the physical world. Anyway, that's an aside. So one thing, obviously, if everyone has smartphone technology, which not everyone does, I'm very well aware of that, but increasing numbers do, including those who maybe are otherwise shut out of like the formal economic system. A lot of people invest in these things because there's just so much incentive to get access to things like, for instance, WhatsApp, which is just such a, particularly in, let's say, the so-called non-developed world. WhatsApp, like in India, for instance, it hasn't happened in South Africa, but WhatsApp is a means by which you can actually buy products and services and pay for them through WhatsApp. I don't think that's launched in South Africa yet, but I mean, it's becoming the everything app. And now, as I'm sure you've seen, Meta have introduced a WhatsApp kind of AI agent in the search bar of WhatsApp. So you can just ask a question there. You can use it as like if you, for instance, had a message that you wanted to type out, but you were too lazy, you could, in effect, say, hey, please can you transcribe this message? You would say whatever your message is, and then it would transcribe it for you. You can copy paste that and then send that to whoever, right? So there's various ways in which you can use it. And I mean, that will probably become even more integrated, where soon it would be almost an intermediary. You can say, hey, WhatsApp. So you just speak to your phone, send a message to so-and-so, just let them know X, Y, and Z. And then there will be this small little, like, your personal AI assistant within WhatsApp, which will then say, hey, this person wants you to know X, Y, and Z. Please can you respond? And I'll let them know. So it's kind of this intermediary, this agent that will do things on your behalf and make life. Anyway, so that's more generally just about how these things will start to transform our communication with others. But it gets obviously interesting when it comes to second language acquisition and learning. And things like ChatGPT, if you haven't looked deeply into it, the more generic term for something like ChatGPT is a LLM, a large language model. That's the underlying technology now, that there's all sorts of models that are competing to have kind of the best. The way it works is there's probabilistic reasoning as to what the next word would be. So it's like text autocomplete, but it's on steroids, right? So that's really all these things are. They don't know anything factual about the world. They just know how to put language together in ways that make sense based on the massive data set that the internet provides, particularly for large and well-resourced languages like English. We'll get to that though. So yeah, one of the things, just as a bit of an intro, that I wanted to show you, I don't know if any of you have encountered, I think it's a Google project called Notebook LM. And so I won't play the whole thing, but maybe just a 5-minute clip of their podcast version of yesterday's lecture slides. So let's listen. Okay, anyway, that OWL, I don't know if any of you noticed, but that was an image that I just found on the web to kind of be a nice thing for the first slide. I didn't go into OWL at all. But what happened was when I took the lecture notes and I put it into Notebook LM, and it has this feature where you can put in like a reading or lecture slides or even a YouTube video that's public. You can plug it into this thing and it will give you, in effect, an audio where there's two people who are discussing whatever the contents of that was. And it processes all the content, both visually as well as in terms of the audio. So there it looked literally at that picture and was like, oh, okay, there's these 6 little bubbles with things that are describing language teaching methodologies, and there's this OWL there. Obviously, all the others were answered because subsequent slides we looked into that, but that's why. So it's like, it's absolutely amazing. So you could do this with absolutely any lecture slide that you wanted as a really engaging way to listen. It's not entirely accurate, so you can't trust it all, but it's almost all there, right? So this is more language generally. This is not now some foreign languages. Obviously, this is in English. It's obviously American voices, American accents. There's a reason for that. Obviously, it's an American company who's developed this. A lot of the language out there is American English in particular. So that's where a lot of these models are trained on that kind of data. So they can produce that language much more easily. Okay, so I will recommend also, indeed, as you prepare for exams, not just for this course, but just to help. I mean, the audible way of engaging with something is very different to just kind of learning through lecture notes and just reading things. And particularly if you like to, I don't know, go for walks or things, you can kind of just listen in a very engaging way to the content that you need to study. Okay, so moving on from that. There are languages which are AI primed. That's one way of thinking about them, as in they are ready to be fitted into an AI system. And so English and other major world languages, there's just a lot of training data with, and an important thing is that there need to be equivalences between both written text and spoken text. So that's the way in which that these models can figure out an intuitive sense of almost the grammar, of the syntax. This is how tools like Grammarly, at least nowadays, work, where just so much kind of language data has gone into it that it understands how things go together, what sounds right, the correct style, how to make things more polite, or things more formal, informal, casual, all these ways in which it can transform language. But then there are certain languages that are not AI primed, and there's a paucity or a lack of high quality translated language content. So just really for non-dominant languages out there, they're often quite regional. In many cases, they're minority languages or indigenous languages, which do not have necessarily high status at a global level. And that obviously then has implications for the extent to which artificial intelligence can be used to manipulate those languages and to use them for useful purposes. However, here's an example of, well, it's not too large at this moment, but it's a language model called Nkuba LM, which is being done by a locally based AI company. And the aim is really to just bring together a data set of a lot of African languages to help do the things that ChatGPT does. But I mean, you could probably ask, and I have done this, ChatGPT to respond. You could use an Nguni language. It has a very, very basic, it makes up a lot of the grammar and the words. It doesn't know how to differentiate between, say, isiXhosa and isiZulu. And maybe sometimes it'll throw in Kiswahili in there. It doesn't really have a good understanding because it wasn't trained on that. Something like this aims to remedy that. So there is work being done on bringing together a whole bunch of audio and text and training an AI model to be able to understand and manipulate other languages that are not like English, right? Where there's just so much online content in it. Okay, so this then brings us to what I'd call AI-assisted language learning, which obviously is relevant to, our topic for this term. So there's been, and this I think has happened, in the last maybe 10 to 15 years, where for a long time, everything was it was all about literacy and literature and becoming literate. And I think, there was a pre-literate world, and that's where everyone did everything orally. If you had stories, they were passed down from generation to generation by grandmothers and by people who would tell, children stories and histories, and that's the way it would work. It would be oral. People's memory was geared to remember things that were transferred to them through the airwaves. But then for some cultures at least, and there's pros and cons to this, kind of a more literacy-focused way of using language, of remembering things occurred. And so for a long time, that held dominance. But I think now there's been a turn towards the oral again. We've gone back, and that's because technology has enabled it. Where what you just heard, that was a machine that just generated based on a bunch of lecture slides. There's no need for me to actually read a single thing. I can also use another model. I was experimenting with it yesterday, which Microsoft has this free service where you can just give it a whole bunch of text, and then it will read it to you in a way that sounds really natural. It knows when to pause, because it kind of has an understanding of the meaning as well as the structure of the language. So you can, if you had an article that you needed to read, you could just listen to it now, right? I'm sure some of you have kind of found tools that do this for you. So there's been a turn towards the oral. And part of that is also social media. You can see it where back in things like Twitter, obviously Twitter or X as it's now known, those still are there and people still use them, but we've been going more towards the visual, the video, the audio. So things like, TikTok or Instagram, Snapchat, presumably these others, but they're very engaging. They have to do with the kind of what you see and what you hear. And those are primary as opposed to text. So I don't know if any of you remember statuses on Facebook where you have a status update. That's probably a bit old now, but I mean, typically that was you would just kind of express your thoughts. Whereas now it's very much our thoughts in a visual way or in an audible way. Even on WhatsApp statuses is in the same way. Anyway, I won't belabor the point, but so one thing about AI is that it's always available. And if I were to go into ChatGPT right now, I can turn on voice mode and I would be able to speak to it in really whatever language I'd like, particularly the AI prime languages. So I could, for instance, say, Hallo ChatGPT, ich will mit dir ein bisschen Deutsch sprechen. Kannst du mir helfen? So I'd like to speak some German with you. Can you help me? I'd ask it to speak slowly for me. I'd ask it to use maybe easy words so that it wouldn't be difficult for me because my vocabulary is bad. So just imagine that instead of, say I'm a very anxious person, particularly about making mistakes, so it's something that we looked at with individual differences, now suddenly I can speak with something which is not human, that will not be offended if I make a mistake. And it can actually respond and manipulate my target language in an excellent way, in a really naturalistic way. And so I can engage with that and actually learn, and I can ask it to be a good tutor for me. It can moderate its speech. Okay, so it can be individualized. It can start to understand some of the issues that I have when I'm learning my language. It's very much based on what I say to it. It responds. It's not like this thing where it will always respond to everyone in the same way. And it's always getting better due to machine learning. And like I was saying, learner-specific fine-tuning. So these models of language get better and better And I think in the future, we'll get better based on the people who use them rather than the aggregate population that uses them. So obviously, again, it presupposes having sufficient kind of internet access and a smartphone. But then what that leads to is, we live now, I see around campus, and it's pretty normal for people to have earphones or headphones on all the time. And if you have internet connection, there's an ability to speak with an AI agent all the time, an assistant. So they are able to moderate their speech, whether it's slow or fast, vocabulary use, whether more common vocab or unusual vocab, the grammar of the language, the register or the style, the content. So it's specifically interesting to you. You don't have to talk about some random topic. It can be something that you actually find fascinating or that you want to find out more about. And now increasingly, it's not just at the level of speaking, but you can actually say, well, hey, like I'm doing this thing right now where I'm making this food. Maybe can you describe what this is in my target language? And you can interact with it in multimodal ways where it's incorporating the visual as well. Not yet smell. We haven't gotten to that point where, ChatGPT can smell the smell that you smell and then give you a description of it. So all to say that something like this can become an agent which is very available for almost everyone and increasingly for everyone, that will take away a lot of the barriers of access to a target language, as long as that language is AI primed and the models can actually reproduce it well. So a lot of the large world languages work well for just using ChatGPT voice mode or similar. There are others as well. Google has an equivalent. So one thought is then in classrooms, you can then have a teacher, and this would change the way that what teachers would do in a language classroom. They'd just rather become a coach or an advisor. If, for instance, all the children in a class or indeed in an adult learning class, they would probably, their individualized tutors would be these AI tutors. And a teacher would just help them to manage that relationship well so that it's productive and fruitful. And so that maybe there's structure to the way that they ask these AI agents to teach them using a specific teaching methodology that follows their cognitive learning style or their individual differences, right? And so there would almost be maybe an outsourcing of teaching activities to AI agents, where they would almost become an orchestrator or a conductor of these things interacting with the individual students. Because that's always been a problem with teaching, right? Is that if you have a large class, how can you do things in an individualized way? And if it's, one-on-one tutoring or teaching is like the best thing ever. So if you now have a technology that enables that to happen, why wouldn't we move towards that? Because it just is better. It will reduce the difficulty of learning. And that's the reason why SLA as a discipline exists, because it's difficult to learn a second language. So anyway, I'll come back to that now. So yeah, I mean, then there's a question, well, maybe after a while, we won't even have language classrooms. And I need to further work on that point in the following slides, why we would not have language classrooms anymore. So I'm sure at least some of you are familiar with the story of the Tower of Babel. So pretty much, humanity unified in language and purpose decide to build a tower to reach heaven, right? They want to kind of get up to heaven. That's their goal. And then God or the higher power, fearing their pride, their hubris, and their potential power that they would gain from reaching heaven, as a way of preventing them from achieving their goal of building this massive tower, he confuses their languages so that suddenly they're all speaking different languages, which then causes them to not be able to work together, and then prevents them from completing the tower. So anyway, that's just the story. And I'd like to suggest that what we are seeing now, I'm not going to, why that story was written and kind of the point of it is not so much what I'm going to go into now, but it's interesting that the world, after having lots of different languages for a long time, there's been so much language loss over the last few centuries that a lot of languages are dying out, and we are increasingly going towards just a few dominant languages in the world. So now, as a result of the internet and access to the internet and technology that mediates the internet for us, and now increasingly also with AI, agents like ChatGPT, etc., English is just so accessible to people. English that is perfect for you, for whoever you are, for your competency in the language or lack. So you can use it as a learning agent. You can use it as something that can help you explain certain topics that you want to find out more about. And one of the things that if you do sociolinguistics, and this also gets then into the social factors of SLA, is that if you can acquire and use a dominant language, that always goes with acquiring socioeconomic status in some way. The ability to have more economic capital, more social capital that you can leverage for economic capital. And language is one of the gateways into that, right? So that's part of the reason why, for instance, parents might want their children to be educated at certain schools where they have access to English rather than their heritage language, so that they can have access to that socioeconomic capital, or at least have the chance to access it. So, but the thing with languages, and this is what we've been seeing, particularly in, and conquest and empire has been around since humanity existed. There's always been one tribe or group conquering another. And one of the effects that has is that the language of the conqueror then tends to overwhelm the language of the conquered. So there's kind of like, in purely evolutionary terms, whatever happens at the sociological level, at the linguistic level, there is a winner takes all, or a kind of a dog eat dog thing that occurs where languages die out because all the dynamics of why people want to or need to speak them change in a radical way. So a lot of scholars talk about the hegemony or hegemony, you can pronounce it however you want, of English. Really just the rule of English, which, there are some pros to that, particularly for people who are first language English speakers, a lot of cons. There's an exclusivity to languages like English, which then put everyone who's not a first language speaker on the outside and they can struggle to get in. So I'm by no means promoting this, but it is the reality, right? And I think what will happen because of the internet and now because of tools like AI, which individualize language for everyone, the rule and the power of English as a dominant language will only increase. It's only going to get stronger and stronger. And so that'll be to the detriment of other languages. And there's a term that has kind of been developed in second language acquisition or applied language studies called LOTS, languages other than English. It's funny that they had to come up with a term to say, in effect, every language other than English, right? So that gives you a sense of kind of the problem of the hegemony of English is that, and one of the places that this has been used a lot is motivation for language learning. If you are a first language English speaker, I think I've got this. So for first language English speakers, just down at the bottom, it's an established phenomenon that your second language motivation to learn a second language is often just not there. It's really difficult to learn because what's the incentive? If you already have access to, let's say, so-called the most powerful language or the language that provides social and economic capital, what is the incentive to learn another language unless you're one of those crazy linguist types who just love learning languages for the sake of it? So then I guess my point would be, well, what incentives remain to continue learning non-dominant languages in their pure form? I think people will continue to learn them in an informal way where they will start integrating them into English, or vice versa. English will start integrating into these languages and we'll have creoles developing or patois. But the pure languages, the so-called deep languages of non-dominant languages, they will start not being used. It's something where the grandparents speak it, then the generation after them maybe speak it, but in a form where they can only talk about certain topics. They then maybe don't pass it on to their children. Their children can just understand it from a passive level, so they can understand, but they can't speak or write. And then maybe if they have children, if they don't then invest in their children learning, maybe through getting a nanny who can speak it, those children will probably just speak a dominant language like English or maybe Spanish in the kind of the Americas. So, and it's really difficult then to go and learn a heritage language because you're probably living in a culture where everyone is not speaking that language around you. You're socialized into your dominant language. You might have a heritage language that, comes from your ancestry or parents or grandparents, but it takes a lot of work to learn that language. And maybe it's not viewed as being cool. It's not edgy. Whereas what is edgy is the dominant language plus maybe a few like code switches into certain like heritage, like elements of your previous cultural and linguistic heritage that have kind of been melded in or merged with English. Anyway, I'm sure a lot of you are well aware of the multilingual dynamics of South Africa and can see some of the things that I'm saying in your own experiences of using English and other South African languages. So there's an emergence. This is another term in sociolinguistics called world Englishes, both by, I think, an Indian scholar as well as a South African Indian scholar, Mestri. I think he's based at UCT as an emeritus professor there. But they spoke a lot about, there's just the development of all these dialects of English around the world, so much so that English is almost owned by everybody and nobody at the same time. And what I guess would say is that, well, it seems likely that everywhere in the world, because of things like the internet and access to the internet and now AI on top of that, that a localized dialect of English is just going to become the first language of the majority, not everyone, but the majority of people who have access to those things. And I'd say that's the majority of the world population, and potentially within our lifetime. It might actually be a lot sooner than that, because language shift can happen very, very quickly within maybe 2 generations. So let's say within 50 years' time, it might be the case that something like this is occurring. I might also be vastly wrong in this matter. Hi. Yes. Thank you. Yeah, back to practical matters, right? Okay, so yeah, and then obviously I've also spoken, particularly in the social factors lecture, there's a correlation between language and identity. So like, what does language loss if everyone starts learning English and that becoming their effective first language? What does that lead to if it's happened to everyone, right? If it happens to some people, that can, so I'm saying that, well, if everyone has some version of English and that's normal and that's like their first language, are they going to have an identity crisis where, there's kind of the heritage languages that they used to speak, but now no one speaks that, and they're constantly kind of put in this in-between position? Or is it actually just going to be normal that everyone is like that? And so hybridity, where you're drawing from your heritage as well as your version of English, just becomes the normal way of communicating. And so in the context of that, there's just a few claims that are maybe a bit crazy, but my suspicion is that second language learning will become a hobby and something educationally irrelevant. And will go the way of, there's a subdiscipline of linguistics which has largely fallen out of favor called philology. Also, it's maybe called historical linguistics now, but it's not really a thing that people do. So back in the day, you might have the philology department as opposed to linguistics, right? So there's been a complete shift. And my thought is that maybe if everyone now has access to one linguistic code of a version of English, one of the world Englishes, then language learning, it just for the majority of people doesn't become something that they need to do because they have the linguistic codes that they need to function in a world. And so the impact of AI and internet-mediated communication and then language socialization, almost where people start becoming socialized by AI agents who are their own educational assistants, probably again through English, that'll start becoming one of the primary research areas within SLA. It won't be as interested in some of the things that we've been talking about in this course. But then, particularly in the short term and the medium term, heritage and indigenous language learning will become major foci as well, because language loss will increasingly be normalized, right? So that's going to be, so these are just a few predictions, just in terms of the future of SLA as a discipline and as a phenomenon. Okay, anyway, I hope that was vaguely of interest to some of you. It's just interesting to think about what this is, second language acquisition. What will it be in 50 years' time? What will it be in 100 years' time? when language is shifting and changing before us, with the arrival of these agents and minions like ChatGPT. Okay, moving on to, again, more practical matters, maybe why all of you came here. You can see I didn't change the picture for this one. So this is the content that will be covered in the exam section. So for your June examinations, don't worry, so you don't need to take photos. This is the slides for this. And indeed, all the slides, at the end of term, from the beginning of next term, you'll have access to all the slides. You won't have to necessarily just go through the video recordings. Although I recommend that because obviously then I'm contextualizing the slides for you. But so a few main points here in terms of what's relevant. Not lecture 1 or 11, but all the other lectures. So 2 to 10, that's content that will be covered in the exam. So you need to go through those, review them, study those. Then everything in the following readings. So there's 6 readings. So only the required readings. I won't be drawing on any of the recommended readings. Just a note for week 1, I've slightly changed it where I've reduced the portion that you need to read from as being relevant, and that's from pages 18 to 26. So if you go into Are You Connected, and indeed, there'll be a PDF version of these slides, and if you click on any of these blue links, it will take you directly to there on Are You Connected. So you should use this when you're when you're studying for this section. So all the quiz content and all the questions and answers will be available from, in effect, Friday or the beginning of next term on Are You Connected. And then I also recommend you can get a lot of the readings have come from Kirsten Hummel's textbook on second language acquisition, and you can get a digital ebook copy of that through the Rhodes Library, and that's very comprehensive. So if you actually want to make sure that, for instance, where we looked at was Crash and Write 40 years later, we looked at an article by other people, but if you want to look at Hummel's version of that discussion and that topic, as well as the interactionist approach, things like that, you can go to Hummel's textbook and find maybe ways of accessing those theories, which are just a bit more accessible. Okay, so that's the content that's going to be covered. So hopefully that'll be useful for you. All available on the Are You Connected course. And so there's a YouTube playlist as well of all these lectures. And then I will also upload the lecture slides. So in terms of the exam questions, you've probably all written exams, but there will be some multiple choice questions, maybe a few longer answer questions, almost certainly, and then several short answer questions. So, list differences between A, B, and C, classify the following 2 examples according to its theory Z, identify the type of X in the following, things like that. So this is not probably too helpful for studying. You need to know your content. So in terms of preparation, suggestion is to rewatch the lectures on YouTube or where necessary. So it's particularly ones where maybe you skip that lecture for whatever reason. I suggest you watch the YouTube lecture, go through the lecture slides, reread the required readings, and then if you want to so obviously the first part of this today, I was talking about AI tools, and I'd highly recommend making your content interactive. So getting detailed written and particularly audio summaries so that you can, so I think one of the ways, and this might happen while you're still at university, but assessment has to change. And so there's probably going to be a movement towards assessing people in controlled exam and test circumstances far more than writing essays like we did. But then also oral exams. And this is a thing that historically has been part of the university system for assessing people, but has kind of gone away as universities have become larger and it becomes very difficult to orally examine a lot of people. But I think it's going to become necessary. So what I'm suggesting is that you use these AI agents as your oral exam tutors. So upload, for instance, a reading to an AI agent and then say, quiz me on this, okay? Or help me understand these various elements, and you would be able to respond. So ChatGPT has a voice mode. It's it's excellent. And it would really be very helpful. And I think you can use it for free as well. You can just upload a PDF or upload some lecture slides to it. You can do the same with something called Notebook LM. That's how I created the podcast at the beginning. So you can do the same. So if you just want to, while you're walking in campus with your headphones on, you can be listening to lecture slides as a podcast. How cool. And then finally, other than that, that's really just a suggestion to use these tools. Now that they're here, they're transforming the way that people learn. You don't have to be looking at things. You don't have to be reading. You can be engaging like orally and using your ears to do learning. And then finally, just retake the quizzes to make sure that you've internalized the content. So with the question and answer sheets that will be available, cover the answers, try and retake them, make sure that you've internalized that content. So yeah, I think that's pretty much everything. We are largely out of time. Thank you, everyone. I'll see you on Friday, some of you, and that's all. Have a great day.